So the word Hokage is often associated with Itachi Uchiha, and for good reason. He's one of the most skilled, powerful, and wise shinobi in the Naruto series. And at the same time, Itachi is also often compared to Minato Namikaze for the exact same reason, because Minato is also one of the most skilled, powerful, and wise shinobi in the Naruto series. So today, I thought it'd be interesting to do a little bit of a role reversal when it comes to these characters. Now, this is mainly going to apply to Itachi as it is an Itachi focused video. So to be more specific, it's going to be how Itachi would likely deal with a Nine-Tails attack on the Hidden Leaf Village instead of Minato if Itachi were the Hokage. Like, would he end up doing better or worse? Now, to do this hypothetical scenario, we have to make some other role reversals aside from just Itachi and Minato. As in, if Obito still needs to come to the Leaf Village to capture the Nine-Tails, the Nine-Tails will obviously have to be inside of a Jinchuriki. And if Minato is going to be a kid like Itachi was in the original timeline, I think we can safely assume Kushina will be too. So in that case, for the sake of the video, let's just say that Itachi's girlfriend, Izumi, is the Jinchuriki instead. Regardless of whether or not you think she'd be a good candidate is neither here or there. Let's not be pedantic about it. So before we go any further, I think it's also better that we lay out which Itachi we're going to be using here. I know y'all probably going to get on to me in the comments about this, but obviously we can't just use a sick Itachi, as that just wouldn't be fair. So we'll use peak and as healthy Itachi as we can get. Like no sickness, no ninja cancer, along with his full eyesight. When it comes to his eyesight duration and chakra reserves, if you're a channel veteran, you'll know that I usually give Itachi a reference point of 5 Kage Summit Sasuke as to how long his eyesight and chakra reserves can hold out if he were to hypothetically, spam his MS ability. So in other words, picture Akatsuki Itachi in Minato's place, but not on his deathbed and not actually in the Akatsuki. So this of course means that he has his Mangekyō Sharingan and by extension Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, Susanoo, and both Izanami and Izanagi. Now, I'm going to do something here that might not make sense, but since it's a hypothetical, I think it'll be okay. But if we did this chronologically, then obviously the way Itachi gets his MS was because of Shisui's death, meaning that Shisui himself wouldn't be in this situation to help Itachi. But for the sake of one half of this video, I'll say that Shisui is alive and in the village. Also, by extension, just in case anyone's wondering, the Uchiha clan massacre obviously hasn't happened yet, but the Uchiha clan are on good terms with the Leaf Village, just for the sake of this video. And for the sake of balance, I'll add a scenario where Shisui is not in the video to help Itachi. And then the last thing to note is that everything else is still going to be the same as it was in the original story. That is, Obito is the one who attacks the village, and Hiruzen is still around but retired, etc., etc. So, first things first, if the premise for this situation stays the same, then Izumi is in labor and needs to be taken to a secure place to prevent the Nine-Tails from escaping during childbirth, meaning that this is Obito's best chance to strike and try to capture Kurama. So Obito still does what he did originally, kills the guards, and holds Itachi's son at knife point. Now, how does Itachi react to this situation? Well, assuming Obito still throws up the baby and attempts to stab it, Itachi will likely be able to save him just as quickly as Minato saved Naruto. Since, from what I can see, there was no FDG mark on Naruto or the blanket that he was wrapped in, means that Minato didn't get to him by teleporting, but just by his basic travel speed. And since there really isn't much discrepancy on how much faster Minato is than Itachi outside of teleportation, we can safely say that Itachi would likely be just as fast, if not, maybe a hair slower. Like, maybe you can say Minato is still above Itachi in terms of travel speed, but it's not like a night and day difference. Anyway, Itachi still saves his son, but then there's the paper bombs that were attached to the blanket that Obito put on him. And since Itachi doesn't have FDG to get safely away from the explosion, I'd say the best thing for Itachi to do here is to use Susanoo to defend he and the baby. This would obviously give Obito the opportunity to pull Izumi into Kamui and take her somewhere where he can extract the Nine-Tails. So if things proceed how they did originally, then two things are going to be different from this point right off the bat. The first thing is that Izumi will likely die almost immediately after Kurama is extracted from her. I'm not entirely sure if the Uchiha are known to have as an extensive life force the same way the Uzumaki do, and by extension how Kushina did. Like, even Obito remarked specifically that the Uzumaki clan have an incredibly impressive life force, given that Kushina didn't die for a good bit after she lost Kurama. Now, to be fair, Sasuke did survive long enough for Kabuto to come and save him after being stabbed by Madara Uchiha in the war art, so maybe they do. But in terms of the context of the Naruto series, I think a tail beast extraction is more life-threatening than a stab to the chest. but that could just be me. So if we assume that Izumi doesn't have the same life force, then she will not live for too much longer after having the Nine Tails extracted. And this also means that without having someone like Kushina to help, Itachi will not have something like Kushina's chains to help against the Nine Tails. So Itachi goes to put the baby in a safe location, probably the Uchiha clan district, and since Itachi won't have a way of finding Izumi or getting to her like Minato did, the next best thing to do is alert whoever he can to prepare for a possible attack from the Nine Tails. He'll probably go inform his father Fugaku to order plenty of the Uchiha clan to the center of the village in case of an attack. And he might either go himself or send a crow to Hiruzen to start an evacuation of the village to mitigate loss of life. There's really no telling how many villagers they'll be able to get safely out of the village even with this prior warning, but we can at least say there'll be less civilian casualties than there were originally. Now, if this particular scene happens again, where the Nine Tails is summoned inside the village and it starts destroying everything, and Itachi has a standoff with them like Minato did, then Kurama might try to just launch a Biju Bomb towards him like he did in the main story. Now, obviously, Itachi does not have FTG to send the Biju Bomb away, meaning that he would have to rely on the Yadamir in order to defend. Now, this will definitely help Itachi. The blast might still do some damage to the area around him by a good deal. So if he wanted to try to both defend himself and try to prevent a good bit of the village from being destroyed, the only other way is admittedly a bit headcanony. Now, what I'm about to say is just a theory or an assumption that I've heard, but if we go by the description of the Totsuka blade, it should be able to seal anything it physically pierces. So there is a possibility that if Itachi were to time the strike at the right moment, that he might be able to seal away the Biju Bomb with the Totsuka blade. Now, if we were to use the data book's specific description of the Yadamir, it says those it pierces will be sealed, implying that it could just apply to actual people who are stabbed and not attacks like a Biju Bomb. But if you did want to operate on the assumption that it can seal the Biju Bomb, then both Itachi and the village can be defended from the attack.
Now, I just want to reiterate for y'all, so y'all don't at me in the comments, I'm not saying that it's 100% guaranteed that might happen. Like, obviously, I'm aware that the Totsuka blade might not work that way, but I just wanted to bring it up because I thought it was an interesting idea that I did come across. And since this is a hypothetical, I thought it'd just be fun to think about. So don't at me in the comments as me saying it's guaranteed fact. I'm just presenting a theory or argument that I've heard.
But worst case, Itachi is defended, but there is some serious damage done to the village itself. This, of course, leads to the scene where Obito tries to sneak up on Minato and pull him into Kamui. Now, if Obito does the same thing he did to Minato, and I mean the exact same thing where he speaks to Itachi before he tries to actually pull him in, then that leaves an opening for Itachi to counter by either using Amaterasu or Susanoo. If Itachi uses Amaterasu at the same time Obito is pulling him in, it might just be pulling with him, so the best option is to just use the Susanoo to knock Obito back out of his range. Now, before we go any further, stay tuned till later in the video because I'm going to circle back to this moment. Anyway, now, this is where Itachi will do one of two things. Either decide to stay in the village to help fight Kurama, or lead Obito away from the village to try to not add further chaos to the battlefield, not unlike how Minato did. Now, with the amount of Uchiha members helping the villagers, including Fugaku himself, plus Hiruzen, plus the other ninja that helped Hiruzen, I think Itachi might have the confidence that they'll be able to handle Kurama, if only for a little bit, while he deals with Obito. So, if Itachi leads Obito away, he can do also one of two things here. One, lead Obito away to fight him 1v1, or send a clone or crow to Shisui for backup. So, for right now, let's just say it's a 1v1. Itachi leads Obito to a similar location as Minato did. Now, while Itachi is leading him away, I imagine he tried to break down the situation the same way Minato did in order to figure out who the man behind the mask, and I think we can all agree that Itachi and Minato are very similar when it comes to intelligence. And even though Minato's guess was wrong, the fact that he concluded that it might be moderate Uchiha was actually a very good guess, and Itachi might come to the same conclusion. Now, what he does with this information is the bigger question, as in, how does he approach this fight? If he truly feels this man is the legendary moderate Uchiha, then he might feel the best way of beating him here is with Izanami. Now, outside of Tsukuyomi, that actually might be true, as though even though this is Obito without as much experience as his orange mask counterpart, Kamui is still a huge problem for Itachi to deal with. But if we take his encounter with Obito on top of Hokage stone phases and say it goes relatively the same as Minato, then Itachi will see that physical attacks will not work on Obito, at least not outright. Itachi may not figure out the exact ins and outs of Kamui, but he'll likely be able to come up with the same conclusion as Minato did and realize that in order to land an attack on Obito, he has to strike him at a very precise time when he materializes, which doing so against Obito in general is nowhere easy, especially not with this Obito in particular, who uses change in combination with Kamui, meaning that certain attacks such as Amaterasu and Totsuka Blade will not likely work in a 1v1.
Now, y'all might also be thinking that the same might apply to Obito not having knowledge about the Totsuka Blade and what it can do, which, fair take. Obviously, Obito will probably not be aware that the Totsuka Blade can seal him if he gets stabbed with it. But being that Obito was going out of his way to phase through all of Minato's attacks with just a base kunai, whether or not Obito knows the Totsuka Blade can seal him, it still looks like getting hit by it would hurt really bad. So I'd imagine he'd go out of his way to phase through the attack from the Totsuka Blade as well.
So the best way for Itachi to win here is either with Tsukuyomi or Izanami, as I said earlier. Now, could these work? Being that this is Obito, a fellow Uchiha, and who we see is particularly decent in Genjutsu to say the least, and who is aware of Izanagi, so he must also know what Izanami is, I'd say the chances of Itachi landing in here are pretty slim. Now, you could say this since this is an Obito who, again, isn't as experienced as a fighter as he is during his Orange Mask days, that he may be more susceptible to being caught by either Tsukuyomi or Izanami. So let's just say for a second that he is. If Izanami is set up and successful, then it's pretty much game over for Obito, right? But if Itachi attempts to use Tsukuyomi, being that this is Obito who is again pretty proficient with Genjutsu, being able to control the Nine Tails with just his base Sharingan, and the fact that Obito is, of course, an Uchiha, and that he has a Mangekyō Sharingan, that he'll likely be able to break out of Tsukuyomi. If that's the case, the best thing for Itachi to do here is override Obito's control of Kurama while he's got him in Tsukuyomi, and either make him stop attacking the village and or help him fight Obito. Though, if Obito loses the Nine Tails, it's more possible that he'll just retreat the same way he did against Minato, as him losing Kurama kind of defeats the purpose of him being in the village in the first place. But for the sake of conversation, let's say Obito continues to try to fight Itachi. If Itachi was able to get Obito caught in Tsukuyomi once, and Obito breaks out of it, I find it very unlikely that Obito will get caught in it again, which means his only win con here would be either sealing him with the Totsuka Blade or Izanami, which, as I said earlier, Totsuka Blade's probably not going to work against this Obito, which means the latter will seem like the safer option. But the thing is, though, I don't know if Itachi can hold out in a fight long enough to set up Izanami. Not saying it's impossible, but Itachi would have to rely on Susanoo for protection for a good bit against Kamui each time Obito tries to pull him in. And in doing so, Itachi will exhaust a good bit of his eyesight and chakra. And in the 1v1, I just don't know if Itachi can put enough pressure on Obito to secure a win. But again, that all circles back around to if Itachi can pull off Tsukuyomi. Like, with how skilled Obito is in general, even despite not being as experienced as his Orange Mask counterpart, and the fact that he'll likely already expect ocular Genjutsu from Itachi, who is another Uchiha in the first place, I think it's less likely Itachi will be able to launch it successfully, at least launch it a second time. Not saying it's impossible by any means, but I just think it's more often than not Obito with Kamui and the chains will provide Itachi just too much chaos to land it. Now, there is a subject of Itachi using either Ephemeral or the Shadow Clone. More specifically, Exploding Shadow Clone. Both are useful, ordinarily, right? But when it comes to Ephemeral, if Naruto was able to combat it even just a little bit, Obito shouldn't have a problem combating it completely, if not outright avoiding it altogether. The Exploding Shadow Clones definitely could injure Obito, especially if Itachi is able to deduce how Kamui works to the same extent that Minato did. He could set up a plan to have one of his clones be sucked in and detonate on command. The thing is, however, if Part 1 Kakashi was able to survive, I feel Obito should too. At the very least, it probably won't kill Obito, but it'll probably damage him enough to where he'll have to retreat the same way he did against Minato. So I think at best in a 1v1, Itachi could secure a draw, but I'd still give this one to Obito like 6 or 7 out of 10 times, which for the Leaf Village, the worst case scenario is that they take back the Nine Tails, but they lose their Hokage. Now, if we rewind for a second and say that Shisui is here as backup for Itachi, then I actually feel this might end a little different, whether by Itachi landing Tsukuyomi or Shisui setting up Kodo Matsukami, or either one of them setting up Izanami. This duo might give Obito a really hard time in a 1v1, especially considering Obito may or may not have knowledge about Shisui's Kodo Matsukami in the first place. The one that Danzo used against Mifune might be easier to land if he and Itachi could put enough pressure on Obito for Shisui to pull it off. Now, I'm not saying Obito gets completely curb stomp here, obviously, as I'm sure even in the 1v2, Obito can give this duo some trouble. But I think at the very least, worst case scenario for Obito is that the duo will eventually at least get Obito's control of the Nine Tails away from him, and he'll be forced to retreat. If not, forced to retreat from an actual battle injury. This is worse if you throw in the fact that Shisui also does have his Susanoo as well. That just adds more pressure that Obito may or may not be able to deal with. I feel like this fight is very similar to how Itachi and Sasuke vs Kabuto. Like, with the backup that Itachi has here in Shisui Uchiha, I feel like one of them will be able to set up either Nami or Kodo Matsukami in order to end the fight. At the very least, like I said, they might be able to pull enough pressure for Itachi to launch Tsukuyomi in order to override Obito's control of the Nine Tails. Now, obviously, let me back up here. I'm not comparing Shisui to EMS Sasuke, but like, you get what I'm trying to say. Now, let's rewind again and circle back to an earlier part of the video. As many of you might be thinking that this whole situation could have ended at the encounter with Obito on top of the Hokage stone face. If Obito does exactly what he did against Minato, again, I mean exactly what he did against Minato, and grabs Itachi's hand after phasing through his initial attack and starts to speak and say something like, "I'm your opponent and you're done for." Itachi could use this moment to use Tsukuyomi right there to, at the very least, again, break Obito's control of the Nine Tails. Now, I've said this before, like, even though you're looking at someone's general direction, it doesn't always mean that you're looking right in their eyes. However, I think I can tweak that initial statement a little bit. I think that comes when you're fighting somebody. You don't always have to be looking in their general direction. But in cases like this, where you're actually talking to somebody, like face to face, as close as Obito was to Minato, I think it's more likely that Itachi can use this moment to launch Tsukuyomi. Again, you could like say that Obito may not be that careless and still look at Uchiha right in the eye, but I do think it's more likely here that he could launch Tsukuyomi than he would in a battle later on. So if this does happen, then, I mean, the Nine Tails attack kind of ends a lot earlier. At the very least, like, the Nine Tails won't be wreaking havoc, but Obito might still get away, because I don't think Obito will be dumb enough to fight Itachi and then the rest of the Leaf Village without the assistance of the Nine Tails. So I think at the very least, Obito still gets away, but if Obito was dumb enough to confront the village and Itachi, I think he obviously loses. So yeah, and that's without Shisui as backup. So
now, there is the subject of Itachi being able to use either Amaterasu or Totsuka Blade on the Nine Tails specifically. Like, if he starts wreaking havoc inside the village and Itachi is able to confront him in any way, Itachi may or may not be able to use either the Totsuka Blade or Amaterasu to handle the Nine Tails. With the Totsuka Blade, definitely easier since, I mean, the Nine Tails is a big target for a poke for the Totsuka Blade. But if Itachi has the same mindset as Minato did, because Kushina in the original series was ready to outright kill Kurama, but Minato decided against it because he wanted to have the Nine Tails as an asset for the Leaf Village. So assuming Itachi has the same mindset here, he might not want to risk sealing Kurama in the Totsuka Blade, because I'm not really sure if he's able to bring out things or beings that he's sealed within the Totsuka Blade, like how Obito can just bring out people that he pulls into Kamui. I really don't know if that's how it works, but if that is the case, then like I don't think he's going to want to risk losing Kurama forever. As far as Amaterasu, I don't know if that's going to permanently like injure Kurama by the time Obito like controls him and tells him to just chop off whatever tail or arm is on fire. Like, it'll take a while for it to actually kill Kurama. So I don't really know if Amaterasu will be like a end-all be-all solution to that.
So I think, worst case scenario, I think Itachi loses in a 1v1 more often than not. Although very high difficulty, I still think Itachi can take it. But in a 1v2 with him and Shisui fighting Obito, I think they could pull out a win more often than not. And if maybe Itachi is able to launch Tsukuyomi at the Hokage faces before they even fight to begin with, then I think the attack on the village ends a lot sooner. So, like, because most people can agree that Obito is still really broken even at this point, and even against a Nakatsuki Itachi. But given the circumstances, I think Itachi could pull out a win, but more often than not, it's a draw at the very least, and I think Obito wins slightly more than Itachi. But in the 1v2, if Shisui were here to back him up, I think they could definitely take this more often than not. So there's the video. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all did enjoy. Let me know in the comments if you guys think I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I missed. Thank you all for watching. I have another what if video next time, so stay tuned for that. Until my next one, like the snow, out.